Hello everyone, this is Direwolf20 and welcome to a brand new mod spotlight on Psi. It is time to check out this cool mod. Those of you who watch my Forgecraft series have probably already seen a little bit about Psi, and today we're going to cover the mod in depth. This will probably be at least a two-part spotlight, and I'm thinking to cover the basics in part 1 and the more complex stuff in part 2. So what can you do with Psi? A lot. Kind of the sky's the limit. There's a lot of different mechanics and a lot of different things that you can do with Psi. Basically, you can create custom spells that you can cast at creatures and blocks and all kinds of other stuff. So, let's get started checking a look at Psi. So to get started, it's very easy. You press C on your keyboard. Now, if you've played Psi before, it's going to detect that you've already played Psi in this Minecraft instance, and if you want, you'll automatically be leveled up to the level that you were in your other playthrough, so you don't have to go through the tutorials again. However, because I want to go through the tutorials to show you guys, I'm going to hit the X button here. Now, it's going to say, all right, you chose not to go ahead and go through that, so I'm going to give you a little introduction. In order to get started, you need to go ahead and craft a couple things, and it kind of gives you the idea here what you need. You need to get Psi dust, so you need to start by crafting a CAD assembler and an iron CAD assembly. Place down the CAD assembler and put the iron CAD assembly in it to construct a very bare bones casting device. Cool? So let's take a look. So first we're going to want the CAD assembler, and we place that in the world. And these things are pretty easy to make. Usually, just iron and piston, simple stuff. So now we're going to need the iron CAD assembly. So there's different components, 5 of them, that go into making a CAD, which is a casting assisting device or something like that. We're going to make the most basic of which because we don't yet have access to the other stuff that we need. So to make that, we just take our iron CAD assembly and place it in here, and we'll get the very basic bare bones casting assistant device. Cool? You'll see there's a bunch of stats on here, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, and it'll make more sense as we go further into the mod spotlight. So we're going to go ahead and craft this. Nice, and now we've got our casting assistant device. In order to really get started, you're going to need some redstone because a lot of the recipes beyond this are going to require some Psi dust. Okay, now this can be turned into a block form, and basically what we're going to do to make Psi dust is drop redstone on the ground and right-click it with this basic casting assistant device. Ta-da! Now, when we press C, notice that a bunch of things happened, right? First off, I've got this new meter on the right-hand side indicating my current Psi level. This is the energy that we use to cast spells. The other thing we can do is press C to level up. Now, as you go through the levels, you will also get some tutorials. So basically, the leveling system is also a tutorial on how to use the mod. And there's a bunch of things in here, even some stuff that you haven't seen because they've been implemented since I covered this on Forgecraft. So, let's get started. To progress further in the mod, you're going to want a spell programmer. And the recipe for that includes Psi dust. So we're definitely going to want to go ahead and get one of those. This is what we can use to create the custom spells that we will be using. Neat. Also, to progress, we're going to want a couple things to make our casting assistant device better. I'm actually going to get rid of the one I have and go ahead and grab the iron CAD assembly. To get started with a basic casting assisting device, you're going to want a basic CAD core, as you can see here. The more advanced ones require Psi metal, which we won't have access to for a while. So I'll go ahead and get the basic CAD core. The other thing you're going to want is a basic CAD socket. And again, the higher tier versions are going to require Psi metal ingots, which we don't have access to yet. Cool. You'll also need some Psi gems later on to get even higher level stuff. And really that's all you need for your most basic CAD. If you want, you can also get a basic CAD battery, which we'll talk about what they do in a little bit. Again, tier 2 version requires the Psi metal ingots. And colorizers. Colorizers are just nifty ways to color your CAD. They really don't alter the stats too much. I'm going to go ahead and get a blue one just for the heck of it. And I'm going to skip the battery for now because I'll tell you what they're all about in a little bit. Cool? So let's create a better CAD gun. So notice as I add things to here, we're modifying a little bit some of the attributes of this gun, and some of the stats are changing. Again, I'll probably talk about the stats a little bit later once we've made our first spell or two, so that you guys have a true understanding of what the stat system is like. Cool? So in order to level up and get Psi level 1, we just choose tutorial level 1 and we hit the learn button. Boom. And we're going to get a whole bunch of text over here on the right hand screen, which you guys, I encourage to read at your own leisure. It's going to basically tell you how to do things with the new abilities you were just granted for level 1. So definitely recommend reading this as your first time playing through, or you can kind of use the Spotlight as a guide, but still should read it, trust me. Tutorial level 1 is one of the longer ones. There's 1 or 2 that are similar in length, but most of the other ones are pretty short and just give you an idea of how things work. The other thing that you get by leveling up here are 2 new abilities. First is a trick. Tricks affect the world in some way. Cool, that's pretty much the best way to do it. And selector, caster. Selectors are basically choosing who or what is getting affected by the trick. So the trick is going to do something, and the caster is pretty much saying who is it going to do it to. So to progress past each level, there's a little red line around one of the things that you're given. Basically, you need to make a spell using just that one to progress to the next level. So it's really easy to progress through the tutorial. Just make a spell using this, right? And if you read through the stuff, it tells you how the spell works. So we're going to need to make a spell using the debug trick, which is a very basic trick. It's basically meant for debugging purposes. So open up your spell programmer here by right-clicking on it, like every other block in Minecraft. And there's a couple things that we're going to need to do. First, we right-click on one of the empty slots here and define what's going to go into it. We want to use the trick debug, okay? So we're going to left-click on that, and it's going to fill that into the slot. On the left-hand side, there are inputs that can go into that trick debug, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. If you hold Shift, you'll see what happens. So it tells you that this trick debug is for testing purposes. Basically, all it does is print out the target in your chat bar when this spell is cast. Very simple, very basic, but it's level 1, so I mean, what do you expect? It's telling you with the left arrow here on the bottom that says none. That's what the output of this ability is, right? So there's nothing that comes out of this, right? But something needs to go into it. It needs to know what to print out. So one of the inputs is a target, which is anything. So you can put any target in here. One of the targets, pretty much the only thing we have available at the moment, is the selector caster. So we'll notice that it selects the person casting the spell. Notice this time that the left arrow is an entity, be it a living player, right? So you can see the trick debug doesn't output anything, right? It's the left arrow. The selector caster, when it's used, is going to output the person that's casting the spell. So we can see here, one of the things we need to bring into the debug trick is the target. So to do that, we just tell it on the left-hand side which side inside this little grid has the target of the spell. So if I hit the left arrow here, it'll show that the target for the trick debug is going to be the selector caster. That's all there is to it. Nice, right? The only other thing you need to do is name your spell. One of the things, by the way, that you'll see is a big red X up here. Compilation error. Spell is unnamed. Oh, well, there's your problem. Cool. So we'll call this the test debug spell. Nice. You'll notice now that on the right-hand side, there's some information about the spell, how complex it is, basically how many actions it executes. There's really only one action, and that is the trick debug. The caster obviously doesn't count as an action. The potency of the spell, the cost of the spell, the projection, and the bandwidth, which we'll talk about a little bit more as we progress. So let's go ahead and actually set this spell up. You'll notice, by the way, one of the cool things is the spell programmer tells you everything about it just by looking at it, which is really neat. Now, in order to cast the spell, we're going to need to get a spell bullet right here. This thing's easy to make. Just iron ingot and sawdust, right? Right-click on a spell programmer with a spell bullet, ta-da! And you'll notice that you get a spell bullet and it gets named, right? And if you hold Shift, you'll see information about that spell bullet. There are other types of spell bullets, which we'll talk about as we progress through the mod. Now that we're ready to cast this spell and we have the spell bullet, simply place your casting assistant device into your CAD assembler, and you'll notice now it goes into the left slot. This section down here are basically the rounds that you can cast with this casting assistant device. So the first round we're going to put in there is the test round. Notice that this gun has only 4 sockets available. You can see socket 4, right, on the tooltip there. So that's why there's only 4 slots available here. You can get other, I think it's the sockets here that basically give you more sockets. So as you upgrade and get better sockets, you can pretty much carry around more spells with you at any given time. Cool. Now that we're ready to cast the spell, hold C, and it'll bring up a radial menu. Remember, there's 4 slots in this gun, so let's just let go of C down here and right-click. Ta-da! So 2 things happened. Number 1, I just cast a spell, and that spell gives me information about the player that cast it. And you can see entity player, and it tells you here Direwolf 20, New World 3, that's the name of the world, and the XYZ coordinates of where I'm standing when I cast it. Pretty cool, right? The other thing that happened is I leveled up because level 1 said I had to use the trick that was highlighted in red here, and that would cause me to level up. So simply by making a spell and using it, I've leveled up to level 2. Nice. That's pretty cool. So remember, C to bring up your radial menu while you have the cat in your hand. Make sure to not have the cat in your hand when you press C to bring up that level up system. So now we're ready for level 2. So let's go ahead and level up. First off, we're going to get 2 new abilities. First, we're going to get the constant ability, which allows us to enter a number, and it's simply going to output a constant. It doesn't have any inputs. Okay. The other thing is a connector that can connect different things throughout your system, and you'll understand the need for that in a little bit as we get into more complex systems. So now we need to use this number thing. So let's just modify the spell that we've already done. You'll notice that one of the things that we had here was the ability to input a number to the trick debug, right? So that's optional though, and that's what those little square brackets around the arrow mean. It means optionally we can give it a number, right? It doesn't have to be there. Obviously it doesn't have to be there because we just made a spell without a number. That's also what this little red dot here means. It's an optional input. So let's add our constant number, and we're going to put the number 5 in there. Nice and easy, right? And all we have to do is say, hey, the number that you want for an input, it's below the trick debug. Easy peasy. Now we've got a new spell. We could either put that into a new bullet, or we could take the bullet out of our gun, right-click on it, and put it into the gun. Cool. Now let's cast. Ta-da! We leveled up. First off, you'll notice that now there's that little number 5 right in front there. Again, this is just a debug and an introduction tutorial. You're probably not going to be using this too much as you get deeper into the mod, though you might use it to debug some of your more complex spells as you proceed through the mod. But for now, you'll notice that little number 5 landed right down there, and we leveled up to level 3. How cool is that? Nice. Level 3 is a new tutorial that unlocks the trick for add motion. Oh, cool. We can actually start doing neat things. Let's go ahead and hit learn. Ta-da! Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is boring. Nope, not anymore, because now we can do things that are cool. This section also, by the way, talks about some of the stats in your gun and spell. So complexity, the amount of actions your spell has. And it tells you that constants, connectors, and debug tricks aren't counted. Cool. Potency, the power of your spell. As you increase the power of your tricks, this goes up. Cost, this is the amount of psi it costs. So you'll notice that we're getting 200 psi every time we level up. So we're up to 600 total now. So that's cool. And then projection and bandwidth. So apparently debugs, I was not aware, but debug doesn't count. So maybe the complexity is the selector caster, not the debug trick. Cool. So let's go ahead and clear these out. So to remove things, you can hit, just highlight them and hit the delete key on your keyboard. Or if you hit Control-Shift-Delete, it clears out the whole spell and completely resets it. So in order to level up, we're going to need to use the add motion trick. So let's go ahead and create a spell that uses add motion. Cool. So the trick add motion here will not have any outputs, but it requires 3 inputs, and all 3 are required. First, it needs a target. What's going to have motion added to it? And this can be anything in the world, including the player itself. The other thing is a direction. So we basically need to know what direction to send the object, right? We want to give it motion, but we have to say what direction to move it in. And then finally, speed, how fast we want that motion to go. Cool. So first off, we'll go with target, because that's easy. It needs an entity, right? So we already know what we want to move. We want to move ourselves. So let's do selector caster, right? Easy peasy, done and deal, right? So this gives an entity as an output. This requires an entity as an input for the target. So we just hold it. The target is the block on the left, which is the selector caster. Easy. The direction, now things are going to get a little more difficult. What direction do we want to move in? Well, one of the new tricks that we got in level 3 was operator entity look. Cool. So that takes a target entity and figures out what direction it's looking in. If you want to see as a neat trick, you can hit F3 and B. And what that's going to do is show you this little blue line coming out of your face. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can kind of see it there on my screen. That's the direction that it's looking. If we had an object on the ground, all entities actually have a look vector, so you can just throw an object on the ground. That's the direction that this little piece of cobblestone is looking. Cool, right? And if I had something like a spider, that's the direction it's looking. And see how he's looking right at me? Ah! So that's the entity look vector, okay? So I want to find out what direction my player's looking in. So first, I'm going to put the operator entity look down. And we're going to tell this that the direction is the entity look vector. However, entity look vector requires a target. So we could put another selector caster here and say that. But we're really using selector caster both times, so why don't we instead use one of our new things that we got? And that is these connectors. So I'm gonna have a connector that points up. And because my operator entity look here is already looking for a target on the left, it draws that connector line. So now we've seen how connectors work. Simply place them and point them around, and you can say, hey, this operator entity look, follow the line. Oh, it's selector caster. Cool. So now we figured out the target and the direction. All that's left is speed. I'm going to go with a speed level 1, and we're going to say that your speed is on the right here, and we should be good, and let's call this spell jump. Nice. That's pretty cool. So the potency is 3 out of 100. The psi cost is 8. Let's change this to, like, can we make it 5? Yeah. Can we make it 6? No, 5 it is. So you notice that the stronger the speed motion that we add to it, the higher the potency and the higher the psi cost. Pretty cool. Projection here is the amount of tricks that we have. So this trick add motion, we can only have 1 trick per spell at the moment. More advanced guns will have higher numbers here. Cool. And bandwidth is pretty much the width or height, whichever is largest. So right now we've got a width of 3. 1, 2, 3 blocks across. Cool. Watch what happens when I remove this constant. Well, it won't actually go anywhere. Let's see. Is there any way I can squeeze this into 2? No, it needs to be there. So let's bring this back to 5, and we'll try out the spell. Cool. So I'm going to get myself another spell bullet. Ta-da! And put it into my gun. And now we can see that we've got test and jump. Jump should, if we do everything right, and I'm going to turn off that look vector thing, should do a trick add motion. The target is the caster, and the direction is the caster's looking direction, and it should be a constant 5 speed. Let's give it a shot. So I should go flying in that direction when I right click. Sweet! That is cool. And I leveled up. So now we've got all kinds of new abilities in level 4. We've got the explode trick. Goes boom. Makes sense. We've also got entity position, which is an operator, another vector. And then we've got operator vector raycast. Ooh, now we're going to get into some complex vector stuff. But don't worry, it's okay. It's not as hard as it sounds. And then finally, we've got the error suppressor ability. So in order to level up, we need to make a trick that causes explosions. Let's do it. So let's clear this out. Now, if you ever want to copy your spells, I don't know if spell drives are craftable yet. Are they? No, they require psi metal ingots. So we'll talk about spell drives when we get there. But another thing you can do is export to clipboard, which is pretty cool. Must be holding shift. Click. Cool. Now it actually places this on your computer's clipboard, so you can paste this in a notepad, you can put it up on Pastebin, something like that to share it around. Now if we got ourselves another spell programmer and hold shift and click on the import, notice that the exact same spell came in. Cool, right? So you can very easily copy and paste these things. There's other ways to share them in-game, which are the spell drives, which basically work like spell bullets, but they're like USB drives. They can store the data and share them with your friends kind of deal. But that's just how copy and paste works. Very cool ability, and I can see people starting to like paste these into Pastebin or something and then share them out on the internet and all kinds of cool stuff. So just imagine that for yourselves. Let's take a look at exploding tricks. Control-Shift-Delete to clear the board. So Trick Explode, cool, needs to know the position at which to explode, and that requires a vector, okay? And the other thing it needs is power. Now, if we were to, for example, choose the position as the entity position of the, say, player, which we could easily do, selector caster, so we're going to say the position is the caster, and then we're going to say constant level 2. Do I have enough of that? Is that cool? Spells unnamed. We'll call it boom. Oh, see, level 2 is a little bit too strong. Let's make it 1 for now. Again, we'll have stronger guns later, right? So this will totally work, right? But it's going to cause an explosion at the player's position, okay? So let's go ahead and try this out with another spell bullet. And cast it. By the way, this will cause you to level up, so that's good too. Well, that was kind of boring. Just causing explosions on me. I don't want to do that. Let's come up with a better approach. One of the things that we learned as a result of level 4 was the vector raycast. Now, this is a way to take direction that a player is looking in, which is pretty cool. We're going to talk about vectors, I think, in a more advanced tutorial that'll be focused on vectors, but for now, we'll talk about some of the basics of vectors. So let's change our Trick Explode spell to go ahead and hit whatever block we're looking at. So to do that, we're going to need the vector raycast. Now this is going to output a vector. However, it requires the input of a vector, another vector, and a number optionally, which is a max. So you can give it a limit of a range, right? So let's take a look. So this position where the explosion is going to occur requires a vector, right? And we'll stick with, that so that thing's happy, right? So now our vector raycast needs two things. First, it needs to know which position to start at. So to figure this out and to explain this in a very simple manner, let's talk about what a vector is. A vector in a 3D environment, like this one, is just a position in space, right? So my character is at a position vector of -1, 67, 128. That's my XYZ coordinates, right? So that's pretty easy. This block is sitting in a vector position, right? The position of this block, the XYZ position of this block, is its coordinates in space, right? So let's bring up, do I still have my debug command? Yes, cool. So here are my coordinates in space, and there's the coordinates of that block. Now, the vector raycast is a special function that follows a line and terminates at the first block it finds. So basically, what it needs is a position to start at, which could be, for example, the position, entity position of the caster. Okay, so that's where this raycast is going to start. So this thing's happy now, right? I know where I'm starting. I'm starting at the caster's position, which is right here. Now, where am I going to end at? Or what line am I going to follow to find a block? The line that we want to follow is called the ray, and that is also a vector. That's going to be the entity look, okay? And again, we're going to use the caster as the target for that, right? So we're basically saying, start at the position of this entity, which we chose as the caster. So start at the caster's position and follow the ray of the direction that he's looking in. Again, we're using the same caster. Once we run into a block, and if we wanted to, we could say at a max distance of so many blocks. But once we run into a block, that's where we're going to assign the output of this vector. So the output vector is the block that it hits as a combination of the current position and the looking direction, okay? Pretty straightforward, I hope. So again, if we were looking at our spider example, and we did F3B, right? The start position is here. He's looking in that blue line direction, currently at me. Stop looking at me, spider. He's following that line, and it's going to just look for the first block it encounters, right? And then it's going to do the explode on that. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to get my boom spell out of here, re-encode it, and give it a whirl. You ready? Let's do it. Nice. It's working beautifully. Now, the strength of the spell is not limited to its explosion radius. The way explosions in Minecraft work are pretty much like the hardness of the block in combination with the explosion radius. So the bigger the number here is both a combination of how strong the block it can break is and the radius that it'll explode in. So because it's only a radius 1, it can't really block or break cobblestone, but it has no problem breaking weaker blocks like sand. Nice. So now that we've reached level 5, we're at an impasse. We get to choose which one we're gonna go and figure out next. So there's 3 options here: entities, numbers, and vectors. For those of you who want a lot of complex vector stuff, go to town. For those of you who want to be able to do nifty things with numbers like add, subtract, and multiply, that's the one for you. And for those of you who want to affect entities, like all this cool stuff, select nearby items, select nearby living, select nearby enemies, and that kind of thing, this is the one for you. I'm going to go with entities for this spotlight. Now you do need to get all 3 of these level 5s completed before you're allowed to start working on level 6. And you'll see some of the upgrades that we can see here. So we will definitely be talking about this stuff in a following spotlight, because clearly this one's getting a little bit close to wrapping up point. But let's cover entities and then we'll wrap up. So the entities level is pretty neat. You get access to a bunch of different things. The one you need to use is the operator closest to point. So basically you choose a point in the world and you get the entity that's closest to it. Cool. The other thing you can do is select nearby items, select nearby living creatures, nearby enemies, nearby animals, nearby projectiles, and then you also got the operator entity motion, gets an entity's motion vector. That's cool. Choose a random entity, right? Operator add to list, adds target entity to a list, and operator remove from list. Cool. So we'll talk about a lot of these here, but one of the things you'll note here is that if you do a selector nearby living, it basically returns an entity list. Okay, so basically it grabs a list of all the living things nearby. And then you can either do closest to point, which, takes a target, which is entity list, and returns one of the entities in that list, or you can do random. So there's a couple different ways to figure out which entity from the ones that you got nearby. And entities, for those of you who aren't totally sure, are basically, things in the world that aren't blocks, almost. So items on the ground are entities, spiders are entities, villagers are entities, cows are entities, players are entities, and that's what some of those limit or narrowing down. So you can basically just say, nearby living creatures, nearby enemies, nearby projectiles, that kind of stuff. Cool. So let's do one. I would like to try and make a magnet type spell. Let's see if that's doable. So let's start off, and this is going to be one of your more complex spells because you're getting further into the mod. Let's do target. So the trick is going to be add motion, right? So let's try and add motion to something, right? So the thing we're going to want to do is first add motion to a random entity from a list of nearby items, right? So basically, what do we want to add motion to? One of the items near us. So we'll choose that at random for now. So our target will be this, and the target for this one will be here. Cool. So because this requires one entity, this takes an entity list and chooses one of the entities in that list, and this spell grabs a list of nearby items. So basically, if I had boom, 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 there's a bunch of nearby items. Entity list gets all 5 of those nearby items laying on the ground, and random will choose one of them at random and pass that over to the add motion trick. First, however, the selector for nearby items needs to know the position. So nearby to what? That's going to be pretty easy. We're just going to do entity position. There we go. Operator entity position, and we'll do the caster, selector caster, right? So this guy and this guy. So that will all be happy. And then your radius, we'll make this a constant. So that, and we'll make it like 4 block radius. How's that sound? Cool. So far, so good. The direction that we want to move items in is going to be... Oh, I got an idea. Let's see. Where's my selector caster? I know. Let's put selector caster here. See, this is where things get tricky, is figuring out how to lay out your spells so that you're not, redundant. We'll do, for now, let's do entity look. So direction is the entity look position, and the target is the selector caster. Cool. And finally, the speed can be a constant, which will make 2. That sound good? And then we'll do magnet. So anybody know what's wrong with this spell? It's really more like the opposite of a magnet. And you'll see. If you're really following along and getting a handle on how this mod works, you should have realized by now that this is the opposite of a magnet. At least I hope I'm right about that. But let's see, right? So magnet. Oh, look at that. Cool. So there are no entities within 4 blocks of me, so let's get closer to some. See how it's randomly picking entities to move around? And it's pushing them away from me because my vector that I chose for direction is the entity look vector of the player. So basically I'm saying we want to add motion. What do we want to add motion to? A random entity chosen from a list of nearby items in 4-block radius nearby to the current position of the person casting the spell. What direction do we want to move them in? That look vector, or the direction that the caster of the spell is looking. And the speed is going to be 2. Cool. Let's modify this to be like 4 or 6 maybe. Not 56, that's a large number. 5. Cool. So let's just swap this bullet out. So maybe we'll come back in part 2 of the Spotlight. And, oh yeah, see, we're definitely moving things further now. Nice. Yes, very cool. By the way, you might notice that every now and then I take a little bit of damage if I'm out of psi energy. Why would that be? Well, your psi energy on the right there is your own personal will, or your own, spell power. And if it ever drops below 0, you might take a little bit of damage. You can't cast if you have no psi, but if you have too weak of a psi ability to cast the spell, it will steal from your health pool to do the casting. So do yourself a favor and keep an eye on your health pool. Probably a good idea. For now, Direwolf20 signing off on the Spotlight of Psi, Part 1. We will come back in Part 2 and maybe fix this magnet spell so that it actually pulls objects to me instead of away from me. That would probably be neat. For now, take it easy.